The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick with water, reflecting the glow of city lights. Andrew Holmes stepped into the small cafe, expecting nothing more than a quick coffee before heading back to work. But just as he reached for his phone, a quiet sniffle caught his attention. He turned, spotting a little boy standing near the corner, his blonde hair slightly messy, his blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Andrew wasn't the kind of man who got involved in strangers' problems. But something about the child, his lost expression, the way he clutched his tiny hands together, made him pause. Then the boy looked up at him and whispered, "I can't find my mommy." Andrew's chest tightened. He didn't know it yet, but in the next few moments, his entire world was about to change. The rain had stopped an hour ago, leaving the streets damp and the air thick with the scent of wet pavement and freshly brewed coffee. Andrew Holmes wasn't supposed to be here. He rarely ventured into small cafes like this, preferring the sleek, professional atmosphere of the high-end places his colleagues frequented. But today had been an exhausting day filled with back-to-back meetings, and for once, he wanted a quiet moment away from the towering walls of his office. As he stepped inside, the scent of roasted coffee beans and something sweet filled the air. The cafe was small and cozy, with mismatched chairs and warm yellow lights casting a soft glow over the handful of customers sitting at their tables. Andrew barely paid attention to his surroundings as he pulled out his phone, intending to check his emails while he waited for his order. Then he heard it. A small, muffled sob. At first, he ignored it. The city was full of noise, people rushing, conversations overlapping, the distant hum of traffic outside. But this was different. It was quiet, almost hidden, like someone was trying not to be noticed. Andrew turned his head slightly and spotted a small figure standing near the corner of the cafe. A little boy, no older than 4, was standing alone, his tiny hands gripping the edge of a wooden table. His blonde hair was slightly messy, and his bright blue eyes, eyes that looked strangely familiar, were filled with unshed tears. He kept glancing around, his lower lip trembling as if he were trying very hard not to cry. Andrew frowned. Something wasn't right. The boy was alone. There was no adult hovering nearby, no parent watching him. Against his better judgment, Andrew slipped his phone into his pocket and walked over. He wasn't particularly good with kids. He didn't dislike them, but he had never spent much time around them either. His life had always been about business, efficiency, and control. This situation was none of those things. He crouched down, making sure not to startle the boy. "Hey, buddy. You okay?" The boy startled slightly, his blue eyes widening as he looked up at Andrew. For a moment, he seemed unsure whether to answer, his small hands tightening around the edge of the table. Andrew softened his voice. "Are you here with someone?" The boy hesitated, then sniffled. "My mommy." Andrew glanced around again. "Where is she?" The boy's lip wobbled, and this time, a tear spilled over. I don't know." His voice was small, barely above a whisper. "I lost her." Andrew felt something unexpected twist in his chest. The boy was scared, truly scared. He wasn't just waiting for his mother, he was lost. "Okay," Andrew said gently. "What's your name?" The boy wiped at his eyes with the sleeve of his small jacket. "Olivier." Andrew nodded. "That's a great name. All right, Olivier, let's figure this out. Do you remember where you last saw your mom?" Olivier shook his head quickly. "She was working. She told me to stay in the back, but I got bored, and now I can't find her." His voice cracked slightly at the last part, like he was afraid he had done something terribly wrong. Andrew's jaw tightened. She was working, that meant she had to be somewhere in the cafe. He stood up and turned toward the counter, where a barista was taking an order from a customer. Andrew stepped forward, gently placing a hand on Olivier's shoulder to reassure him. "Excuse me," Andrew said, his voice calm but firm. This boy is lost. He said his mother works here. Can you help find her? The barista's eyes widened in recognition as she glanced down at Olivier. Oh no. That's Lily's son. She turned toward the back of the cafe and raised her voice. Lily. Come quick. Footsteps sounded from the employee entrance at the back of the cafe. Andrew barely had time to process it before a woman came rushing out, her expression panicked as she searched the room. And then she froze. Her gaze landed on Olivier first, her entire body sagging with relief. But then her eyes lifted, just for a second, and locked onto him. Andrew went completely still. He knew those eyes. That face. That voice, when she gasped softly in shock. Standing in front of him was Lillian Brooks. The woman who had vanished from his life 4 years ago. The woman who had once meant everything to him. The woman who was now holding on to a little boy who had his blue eyes. Lillian Brooks couldn't breathe. For a split second, the relief of finding her son safe overwhelmed everything else. She dropped to her knees, pulling Olivier into her arms, running her hands over his hair, his cheeks, making sure he was unharmed. You scared me, baby, she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. I told you to stay in the back. Olivier sniffled but clung to her. I'm sorry, Mommy. I didn't mean to. She exhaled shakily, holding him tighter. But then she looked up. And that's when the weight of reality came crashing down on her. Andrew Holmes was standing right in front of her. Her chest tightened, her breath catching in her throat. It had been 4 years since she had seen him, and yet he still looked the same, sharp suit, piercing blue eyes, the same presence that always made a room feel smaller when he walked in. But there was something different about the way he was looking at her now. It wasn't just shock. It wasn't just disbelief. It was realization. He had seen Olivier. He had looked at him. And he had put the pieces together. For the longest second of her life, neither of them spoke. Andrew's gaze flickered between her and the boy still wrapped in her arms, his jaw tightening, his entire body tense. Then, finally, his voice cut through the thick silence. Is he mine? Lillian's stomach dropped. She had played this moment out in her head 1,000 times over the years, imagining what she would say if she ever saw him again. She had convinced herself she had prepared for it. But now that she was here, with Andrew standing in front of her, with his son in her arms, she felt like she was going to collapse. Olivier, unaware of the storm brewing between the adults, turned his head slightly. Mommy? Lillian swallowed hard. Olivier, sweetheart, why don't you go sit over there for a second? I'll be right with you. He hesitated but nodded, rubbing his eyes as he climbed into one of the cafe chairs nearby. As soon as he was out of earshot, Andrew took a step closer, his voice lower but no less intense. Answer me, ***. Lillian's fingers curled into her palms, her entire body screaming at her to run. But there was nowhere left to go. She forced herself to look him in the eye. Yes, she whispered. He's yours. Andrew inhaled sharply, as if she had punched him. Lillian could see the storm behind his eyes, the way his breathing slowed, his hands clenching at his sides as he processed the truth. She didn't know what reaction she had expected, but when he finally spoke, it wasn't anger. It was something worse. You never told me, he said, his voice low, almost unreadable. For years, Lily. She flinched at the name. No one had called her that in years. She stopped, realizing she didn't even know what to say. There were no excuses that could undo what she had done. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, his movements sharp and tense. Why? Lillian closed her eyes for a second. She had to steady herself. She had to explain. I was scared, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You were so focused on your career, on your company, on building your empire. We were already falling apart when I found out I was pregnant, Andrew. You made it clear that you didn't have time for family. I thought if I told you, you'd offer financial support, but nothing more. Andrew's expression darkened. So you made that decision for me? Lillian's throat tightened. I thought I was doing what was best for him. He let out a short, humorless laugh. What was best? You think keeping my own son from me was what was best? Lillian looked away. Andrew exhaled sharply, his hands bracing on his hips as he turned slightly, as if trying to calm himself down. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The tension was suffocating. Then, suddenly, his voice was calmer. But there was steel beneath it. I want to know him. Lillian's head snapped up. What? Andrew looked at her, his blue eyes unwavering. I want to know him. I lost 4 years, Lily. I won't lose any more. Panic gripped her. She had spent so long keeping their lives separate, convincing herself she had done the right thing. But now, standing here, facing the man she had once loved, seeing the way his entire world had just been turned upside down, she realized that she had no idea what came next. Andrew, I'm not asking, he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. He's my son, and I'm going to be part of his life. Whether you like it or not. Lillian stared at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to argue. She wanted to fight. But deep down, she knew he was right. She had taken his choice away once. She couldn't do it again. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders sagging in defeat. Okay. Andrew nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't resolution. But it was a start. Andrew barely slept that night. His mind refused to slow down, every thought colliding with the next. He had gone to that cafe expecting nothing more than a quick coffee break, a moment of silence before diving back into work. Instead, he had walked out knowing he had a son. A son he had never met, a son he had never been given the chance to love, a son who had spent 4 years growing up without him. By morning, he had made a decision. He wasn't going to let another day pass without getting to know Olivier. He had already lost too much time. He arrived at the cafe earlier than agreed, his nerves betraying him in a way they never had before. He had closed billion-dollar deals without blinking, taken risks in business that could have cost him everything, but none of it compared to the uncertainty he felt now. Meeting his own son shouldn't feel like stepping into unknown territory, but it did. The moment he walked in, his eyes searched for them. Lillian was already there, sitting at a small table near the window with Olivier beside her. The boy was swinging his feet under the chair, focused on the plate of pancakes in front of him. Andrew forced himself to take a breath before stepping forward. Lillian looked up first, her expression guarded but calm. She had barely spoken after agreeing to let him be part of Olivier's life, and now, as she studied him, he could tell she was still trying to figure out if she had made the right decision. Olivier glanced up next, his mouth still full of pancake. He blinked at Andrew, then swallowed quickly. You came back, he said, sounding surprised. Andrew's chest tightened at how innocent the statement was. Did he think he wouldn't? Had he already learned not to expect people to stay? I told you I would, Andrew said, pulling out the chair across from them. I keep my promises. Olivier studied him, as if deciding whether or not to believe that. Then he nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. Lillian cleared her throat, shifting slightly in her seat. We were just having breakfast. I wasn't sure what time you'd get here. I didn't want to be late. Andrew glanced at Olivier's plate, then at the extra one sitting nearby. Did you order for me? Lillian hesitated. I wasn't sure if you'd want anything. Olivier, however, seemed to have no doubts. You can have some of mine, he offered, pushing his plate forward slightly. Mommy says sharing is good. Andrew's lips twitched, amusement slipping through the tension. She's right. He picked up a fork and took a small bite, ignoring the way Lillian watched him as if she was trying to read his every move. The pancakes were slightly cold, but he barely noticed. Olivier grinned. You like pancakes? Andrew nodded. Yeah. Haven't had them in a while, though. The boy gasped. How come? Andrew hesitated, realizing he didn't have an answer that didn't sound ridiculous now. Guess I've been too busy. Olivier frowned. Too busy for pancakes. Andrew glanced at Lillian, who was looking down at her coffee as if she didn't want to get involved. He looked back at Olivier. Too busy for a lot of things. The words hung between them for a moment, but Olivier didn't dwell on them. He simply went back to eating, seemingly content that his pancakes were now being shared. Lillian finally spoke. I don't know what you want out of this, Andrew. He met her gaze. I want time with my son. She exhaled. It's not that simple. It is to me, he said firmly. I don't want to disrupt his life. I don't want to confuse him. But I'm not walking away. Lillian looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words, trying to find cracks in them. Finally, she sighed. We can start slow. Short visits. Time together. I won't force him into anything he's not ready for. Andrew nodded. That's fair. Olivier looked between them, then tilted his head. Does this mean you're gonna be around more? Andrew's throat tightened. Yeah, kid. It does. The boy considered that for a moment, then smiled. Okay. Just like that, the tension in the room shifted. It wasn't gone, not completely, but it was lighter. Easier. Lillian still looked hesitant, still unsure if she was making the right choice, but Andrew could see it now, the small flicker of hope in her eyes. And as Olivier chattered about his favorite cartoons and how he wanted to learn how to ride a bike, Andrew realized something. This wasn't going to be easy. But for the first time in his life, he wanted to fight for something more than just success. Andrew had never been the type to hesitate. In business, in decision-making, in every aspect of his life, he had always been sure of himself. But standing outside Lillian's apartment door, he felt something unfamiliar, uncertainty. It had been a week since their breakfast at the cafe, a week since Olivier had looked up at him with bright blue eyes and asked if he was going to stay. Andrew had kept his promise, meeting them every day, slowly becoming part of his son's routine. Short walks to the park, afternoon visits to the cafe where Lillian worked, and long conversations about dinosaurs and superheroes. It was new, strange, and overwhelming in ways he hadn't expected. But it also felt right. Lillian had been careful. She never left them completely alone, always staying within earshot, always watching. He understood. She was still figuring out if she could trust him, if he would follow through. And in truth, so was he. Today was different. Today, for the first time, Lillian had invited him into their home. Andrew knocked twice, shifting slightly as he waited. The door opened a few moments later, and Lillian stood there, her brown eyes scanning his face like she was still deciding if this was a good idea. She stepped aside without a word, letting him in. The apartment was small but warm. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting soft golden light over the modest furniture. A few children's books were scattered on the couch, and toy cars were lined up neatly on the coffee table, almost as if Olivier had placed them there with careful precision. It wasn't what Andrew was used to, his world was sleek, modern, designed with purpose. This space felt lived in, like a home in a way his penthouse never had. From the hallway, Olivier's voice rang out, excited and full of energy. Mommy, is he here? Lillian barely had time to answer before Olivier came running into the living room, a wide grin on his face. His blonde hair was still slightly damp from a bath, and he was wearing pajamas covered in tiny rocket ships. He skidded to a stop in front of Andrew, eyes bright with excitement. "You came," he said, almost like he had still been expecting Andrew to change his mind. Andrew crouched down, meeting him at eye level. "I told you I would." Olivier's smile widened, and without thinking, he grabbed Andrew's hand and tugged him toward the couch. "Come see what I made." Andrew let himself be pulled along, surprised by how naturally it came. He sat down as Olivier climbed up beside him, proudly pointing to a pile of colorful blocks stacked carefully on the coffee table. "It's a space station," Olivier explained, his voice filled with pride. "For astronauts and aliens." Andrew studied it with the seriousness it deserved. "Looks impressive. Think there's room for more astronauts?" Olivier nodded eagerly. "Yeah. We can build more." Andrew reached for a handful of blocks, letting the boy take the lead as they worked together. He wasn't sure how much time passed, but at some point, Lillian sat down across from them, watching quietly. "You're good with him," she said after a while, her voice softer than before. Andrew glanced at her. "I'm trying." She exhaled, tucking her legs under her on the couch. "He's still figuring all of this out." "So am I." Andrew placed a small block carefully on top of their growing structure. "I get it. But I don't plan on going anywhere, Lillian." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide if she truly believed that. Olivier, oblivious to the weight of their conversation, turned to Andrew with wide eyes. "Can we go to the park tomorrow?" Andrew didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." Lillian sighed, but there was a small smile on her lips. "Guess that means I'm taking the afternoon off." Andrew met her gaze. "Or I can take him myself." Her expression shifted instantly, guarded again. "It's too soon for that." Andrew didn't argue. He wasn't going to push. "Then we all go," he said simply. Lillian relaxed slightly, as if reassured by the compromise. Olivier, however, had already moved on, picking up his space station and setting it carefully on the table like it was the most important thing in the world. Andrew wasn't sure where this road would lead, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about the future. He wasn't strategizing or planning ahead. For once, he was simply here. And it felt right. The next afternoon, Andrew found himself in an unfamiliar situation, standing in a park, holding a juice box, and watching a 4-year-old run circles around him with boundless energy. He had faced high-stakes negotiations, ruthless boardroom battles, and billion-dollar mergers, but nothing had prepared him for keeping up with a child who never seemed to get tired. Olivier raced across the playground, his laughter ringing through the air as he climbed the jungle gym with surprising speed. His small hands gripped the bars tightly as he made his way to the top, then turned to wave at Andrew proudly. "Look how high I am." Andrew nodded, shielding his eyes from the afternoon sun. "That's pretty impressive." Lillian, standing a few feet away, let out a soft laugh. "He climbs everything. It's like he has no fear." Andrew glanced at her, sensing the fond exasperation in her voice. She was dressed casually today, her hair tied back, looking far more relaxed than she had in their previous meetings. It was the first time he had seen her outside of work, outside of the cafe, in a setting that felt normal. "He gets that from you," he said, watching as Olivier carefully began his descent. Lillian arched a brow. "You think so?" Andrew smirked. "You never back down from a challenge either." She exhaled, looking away. That was a long time ago. Andrew knew what she meant. Their past was complicated. There had been a time when they had been inseparable, when he had believed she would always be by his side. But somewhere along the way, ambition had taken over, priorities had shifted, and she had left, without a word, without an explanation. Until now. Olivier came running back toward them, his cheeks flushed from the heat, a big grin stretched across his face. I want to go on the swings. Andrew gestured toward the empty swings nearby. Then let's go. Olivier grabbed his hand without hesitation, and Andrew felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest at the simple, trusting gesture. He followed the boy to the swings, lifting him up onto the seat before stepping behind him. You ready? Olivier nodded eagerly. Push me high. Andrew chuckled. Not too high. Your mom might kill me. From behind them, Lillian snorted. That's accurate. Andrew gave Olivier a firm push, watching as the boy swung forward, his laughter filling the air. He pushed again, falling into a rhythm, listening as Olivier talked about his favorite cartoons, his favorite snacks, the new shoes he wanted because they made you run extra fast. It was strange. He had only known this boy for a short time, but every second with him felt natural, like something that had always been meant to happen. After a while, Olivier slowed down, dragging his feet in the sand to stop the swing. He turned to Andrew with an inquisitive expression. Hey, mister. Andrew smirked. Still calling me mister, huh? Olivier tilted his head. What should I call you? Andrew hesitated, glancing briefly at Lillian. She was watching them closely, but she didn't say anything. He looked back at Olivier, keeping his voice steady. You can call me whatever you want, buddy. Olivier seemed to think about it for a long moment. Then, with a small, confident nod, he grinned. Okay, Andrew. Something inside him twisted unexpectedly. It wasn't rejection, he hadn't expected Olivier to immediately call him Dad. He hadn't earned that yet. But hearing his name from his son's mouth, spoken so easily, so naturally, felt like a step. A small but important step. Andrew smiled. Yeah, buddy. Olivier hopped off the swing and took his hand. I want to get ice cream. Can we? Andrew glanced at Lillian, silently asking for permission. She sighed but smiled. All right. But no chocolate, he gets it everywhere. Olivier groaned. Mommy. Andrew laughed, ruffling the boy's hair. Let's go get some ice cream, kid. As they walked away from the swings, Olivier's small hand still wrapped in his, Andrew realized something. He had spent years believing success was measured by numbers, by power, by the next big deal. But this moment, this connection, this growing trust, felt more important than anything else. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about what came next. He was just here. And he didn't want to be anywhere else. The sun had started to set by the time they reached the small ice cream shop at the corner of the street. Olivier tugged on Andrew's hand, practically bouncing with excitement as he scanned the colorful menu displayed on the glass counter. His blue eyes lit up as he pointed eagerly at the flavors, his energy never seeming to fade. I want vanilla, Olivier announced, pressing his face against the glass. With rainbow sprinkles. Andrew smirked, glancing at Lillian, who shook her head with an amused sigh. You always get vanilla, she teased. Olivier turned to her, eyes wide with mock offense. Because it's the best. Andrew chuckled, stepping up to the counter. Vanilla with rainbow sprinkles, got it. He glanced at Lillian. And for you? She hesitated, her arms crossing lightly over her chest. I'm fine. Andrew raised a brow. You don't like ice cream? Lillian rolled her eyes. Of course I do, I just. Mommy likes strawberry, Olivier interrupted with a knowing grin. But she never gets it for herself. Andrew looked at her pointedly, waiting for her to argue, but she just sighed, giving her son a look before muttering, fine. Strawberry. A few minutes later, they sat outside at one of the small metal tables, the evening air cool but pleasant. Olivier was fully focused on his ice cream, happily licking at the melting swirls as he swung his feet under the chair. Andrew watched him for a moment before turning to Lillian. You really weren't going to get anything? She shrugged, taking a small bite of her ice cream. I just don't usually think about it. It's not a big deal. Andrew frowned slightly. It is if it's something you like. Lillian's expression flickered, as if the words caught her off guard. She stared down at her cup for a moment before shaking her head. I guess I've just gotten used to putting him first. Andrew glanced at Olivier, who was now carefully placing sprinkles on his spoon before eating them one by one. I get that, he said quietly. But it doesn't mean you don't deserve things for yourself too. Lillian looked up at him, something unreadable in her eyes. He could see the hesitation, the years of doing everything alone, the quiet strength that had kept her going. He knew she had done what she thought was best, even if he would never agree with the choice she made to keep Olivier from him. Why did you really leave? He asked after a pause, keeping his voice steady. I need to know the truth. Lillian inhaled deeply, her fingers tightening around her spoon. I already told you, she said quietly. I was scared. You were so focused on work, on building your company, on things that had nothing to do with family. I convinced myself that if I told you, you'd feel obligated, but not involved. I thought you'd throw money at the situation, but that you wouldn't actually want to be part of his life. Andrew's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. You never gave me a chance. She flinched slightly, guilt flashing in her eyes. I know. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. You think I wouldn't have wanted him? Lillian shook her head. I didn't know, Andrew. I honestly didn't know. And by the time I thought about telling you, too much time had passed. I was afraid of what you'd say, what you'd do. I didn't want Olivier to be some afterthought in your life. He deserved more than that. Andrew looked at her, and for the first time, he saw it, not just the woman who had left, not just the person who had made a choice that hurt him, but a mother who had done what she thought was right, even if it had been wrong. He glanced at Olivier, who was now happily humming to himself as he continued decorating his ice cream with sprinkles. He had missed so much, his first steps, his first words, all the little moments that made up a child's life. I can't get those years back, he said finally, his voice quieter. But I'm not going anywhere now. Lillian studied him, her brown eyes searching his face as if trying to find something solid to hold on to. Slowly, she nodded. I know. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't everything he wanted to hear. But it was a start. Olivier suddenly turned to them, completely unaware of the heaviness of their conversation. Can we get ice cream again tomorrow? Andrew smirked, reaching out to ruffle the boy's hair. You trying to make this a tradition? Olivier grinned. Maybe. Lillian laughed softly, shaking her head. Not every day, kiddo. Olivier pouted but then turned to Andrew. But you'll come back, right? Andrew didn't hesitate. Yeah, buddy. I'll be here. And for the first time, he knew he meant it. A week had passed since that evening at the ice cream shop, and something had shifted. Andrew had been consistent, showing up every day, spending time with Olivier, proving that he wasn't just passing through their lives. Lillian still kept her guard up, but there were moments, small ones, where he could see it cracking. Moments when she didn't look at him with skepticism, but with something softer, something closer to trust. Tonight, he was sitting on Lillian's couch, watching as Olivier carefully arranged his toys in neat rows on the floor. The boy had insisted on showing Andrew his favorite action figures, explaining in detail which ones were heroes and which were villains. Andrew listened, genuinely invested, letting Olivier ramble about imaginary battles and secret missions. Lillian was in the kitchen, moving quietly as she made tea. It was the first time she had let her guard down enough to let him stay this long. Usually, she found an excuse to end their visits early, always keeping things controlled. But tonight, she hadn't rushed him out. That felt like progress. Olivier suddenly turned, tilting his head curiously. Do you have a house? Andrew nodded. Yeah, I do. Is it big? Andrew smirked. Kind of. Olivier's brow furrowed as he thought about that. Is it lonely? The question caught Andrew off guard. He wasn't sure why, but it did. He had never considered his home lonely before. It was sleek, modern, perfectly designed. It was functional, efficient. But it had never been warm. Sometimes, he admitted. Olivier nodded, as if that made perfect sense to him. You should get a fish. Andrew raised an eyebrow. A fish? Yeah, Olivier said seriously. They don't talk, but they keep you company. From the kitchen, Lillian let out a quiet laugh. He's obsessed with fish. Olivier turned to her, crossing his arms. Because they're cool. Andrew chuckled. All right, you've convinced me. Maybe I'll get one. Olivier grinned. Can I help pick it? Andrew nodded. Of course. The boy looked pleased, as if that was the most important decision in the world. He went back to his toys, content, and Andrew found himself watching him, still unable to believe how much he had missed. Lillian walked over then, handing him a mug of tea. I still can't believe you're considering getting a pet. Andrew smirked. Things change. She sat down across from him, exhaling softly. Yeah. They do. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The past still lingered between them, unspoken but heavy. There were things they still needed to say, wounds that hadn't healed. But something about this moment felt different. Lillian set her mug down, looking at him carefully. You really want this, don't you? Andrew met her gaze, no hesitation in his voice. More than anything. She studied him, searching for cracks, for doubt, but she didn't find any. Slowly, she nodded. Okay, she said softly. Andrew didn't know what that meant exactly, but he knew one thing. It was more than she had ever given him before. And that was enough. For now. Andrew hadn't realized how much his life had changed until one quiet evening, when he found himself sitting on the floor of Lillian's living room, helping Olivier build a racetrack for his toy cars. Just a few weeks ago, his days had been filled with nothing but meetings, deadlines, and the endless chase for success. But now, here he was, completely immersed in something as simple as setting up tiny ramps and loops while Olivier excitedly explained the rules of his imaginary race. Okay, so this one is the fastest, Olivier said, holding up a red car. But this one, he picked up a blue one, is the best at jumping. Andrew nodded seriously. That's a strong strategy. Are we racing? Olivier grinned. Yeah. But you have to pick a good car. Not a slow one. Andrew pretended to think hard before choosing a sleek black car. How about this one? Olivier examined it, then nodded approvingly. That's a good one. But mine is still gonna win. Andrew smirked. We'll see about that. Lillian sat on the couch, watching them with an expression Andrew couldn't quite place. It wasn't hesitation anymore, not exactly. It was something softer, something closer to acceptance. She had been letting him in, little by little, but he knew she was still wary. He understood. Trust wasn't built overnight, and he had missed years of their lives. He couldn't just expect her to forget that. As they set up their cars, Olivier suddenly turned to Andrew with a question that made him pause. Are you gonna be here tomorrow? Andrew didn't hesitate. Yeah, buddy. I will. Olivier grinned, satisfied with that answer, then went back to positioning his car at the starting line. Andrew glanced at Lillian. She was still watching him, but this time, when their eyes met, she didn't look away. Later that night, after Olivier had fallen asleep, Andrew helped Lillian clean up the living room. It was a quiet, comfortable silence, one that felt almost natural. Lillian finally spoke. He's getting attached to you. Andrew set down a toy car, turning to face her fully. I want him to. I want to be here for him. She exhaled, running a hand through her hair. It still scares me. He nodded. I know. But I'm not going anywhere, Lillian. She looked at him for a long moment before sighing. I'm starting to believe that. Andrew felt something in his chest loosen. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't everything he wanted. But it was something. As he left that night, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about making up for lost time. This was about building a future, one he would never walk away from again. The ending of this story is more than just a resolution, it's a testament to growth, redemption, and the power of second chances. Andrew starts as a man consumed by success, believing his life is complete until he stumbles upon the truth he never knew existed. His transformation isn't immediate, and that's what makes it so meaningful. He doesn't just claim the title of father, he earns it, one small moment at a time. Lillian's journey is just as powerful. She is not simply an obstacle or a love interest, she is a mother who made a choice out of fear and self-preservation. Her hesitation isn't about punishing Andrew but about protecting her son. Watching her slowly let down her walls, not just for Olivier's sake but for her own, adds depth to the story. She learns that she doesn't have to carry the burden alone anymore, that trusting Andrew doesn't mean losing control, it means gaining a partner. But at the heart of it all is Olivier, the innocent soul who brings them together. His trust, his curiosity, and his simple belief in love make the story shine. He doesn't need grand gestures, he just needs presence, consistency, and the quiet reassurance that Andrew isn't going anywhere. The moment he asks, "Are you coming back tomorrow?" and Andrew answers without hesitation is more powerful than any dramatic declaration. This ending isn't about perfection. It doesn't wrap everything up neatly, because real life doesn't work that way. It's about starting over, about learning to trust, about realizing that family isn't built on the past but on the choices we make moving forward. And the most beautiful part? Andrew isn't thinking about what comes next in his career, his wealth, or his legacy. He's thinking about Olivier. About being there. And that, more than anything, proves just how much he has changed. Lucas West never believed in fate, until the night a rain-soaked child stood between him and the exit to everything he thought he knew. Rain poured steadily over Manhattan, turning the sidewalks into shining rivers and casting shimmering reflections from the high-rise lights above. The entrance of the luxury hotel sparkled under the soft glow of the chandelier inside, its glass facade streaked with water as people hurried in and out, shielded by umbrellas or pulled along by doormen. None of them noticed the small figure crouched beside one of the marble columns near the grand entrance. She didn't belong to this world of wealth and warm lobbies. The girl was about 6 years old, her small frame shaking from the cold. Her chestnut hair clung to her cheeks, soaked through and plastered to her skin. Her jacket, too thin for the weather and torn at the sleeve, was dark with rain. She had no umbrella, no backpack or suitcase, nothing but a soaked stuffed animal that she held tightly against her chest as though it could warm her. Her knees were tucked up under her, trying to conserve heat, and every now and then she peeked out to watch the revolving door spin, people stepping in from the storm, dry and clean, brushing past without a second glance. For a while, no one said anything. The girl hoped they wouldn't notice her. But hope didn't last long. A tall man in a black uniform stepped out from the shadows inside the lobby. The hotel's security guard, his brows already furrowed with disapproval, walked toward her with heavy steps. She noticed him only when his shoes stopped right in front of her. "Hey," he said, not unkindly, but firmly. "You can't stay here. This isn't a shelter." The girl didn't answer. She looked up at him with large eyes but didn't move, only clutched her toy tighter. The guard exhaled sharply, not heartless but clearly unsure what to do. He leaned down slightly, perhaps to ask another question, or maybe to guide her away by the arm. Still, she didn't resist. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her shoulders curled in as if trying to make herself invisible. She was so small, soaked to the bone, silent. And just as the guard reached out again, the girl closed her eyes, as if she knew she was about to be sent back into the cold. Lucas West stepped through the glass doors of his hotel with his phone in one hand and a leather folder in the other, his mind still racing from the investor meeting that had just ended. His schedule was tight, as always, and he moved with practiced efficiency, nodding to the concierge without slowing, already scanning his inbox. Dressed in a tailored navy coat and polished shoes that splashed through the edge of a rain puddle, he didn't even glance outside at the storm. Rain didn't matter to men like him. Business did. Inside the lobby, warm lighting reflected off marble floors and golden accents, and the subtle scent of fresh lilies filled the air. The hotel was exactly as he'd designed it to be, flawless, discreet, luxurious. Lucas barely noticed the people passing through. He was about to enter the elevator when a sharp voice broke through the ambient murmur of conversations and gentle music. A security guard's tone, unusually pointed. Then, faintly beneath it, something else. A small, broken sound. A child's sob. Lucas paused mid-step. His thumb hovered over a half-typed reply on the screen, but he didn't hit send. The sound didn't fit here. Not in this place of order and comfort. Slowly, he turned his head toward the entrance, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. The scene near the column unfolded in an instant. The security guard stood over something, or someone, blocking part of Lucas's view. But then the guard shifted, and Lucas saw her. A child. Small, hunched, soaked. She looked completely out of place in the gold and glass world around her, as though someone had dropped a pencil sketch into a colored photograph. She wasn't crying loudly, just letting out quiet, controlled sobs like someone who had already learned that noise got her nowhere. Without fully realizing why, Lucas began walking toward them. His stride wasn't rushed, but it was deliberate, and his presence immediately caused the guard to straighten. Lucas didn't speak at first. He just took in the girl's soaked hair, her shaking shoulders, the stuffed animal crushed to her chest. There was something jarring about her silence, something that tugged at a place inside him he usually kept sealed shut. The guard opened his mouth to explain, but Lucas raised one hand slightly, stopping him. The phone was forgotten in his other hand now, the screen going dark. For a moment, he simply stood there, staring at the child who had no business being alone outside on a night like this. And in that moment, something inside him shifted, not with drama, not with noise, but with the quiet, inevitable weight of recognition. "Leave her," Lucas said quietly, his voice even but with a finality that left no room for argument. The security guard hesitated, glancing from the girl to his employer and then back again, before stepping away with a short nod. Lucas waited until the man was out of earshot before crouching down to the girl's level, careful not to startle her. The marble floor was cold beneath his knees, but he didn't notice. His attention was fixed entirely on the small figure in front of him. The girl looked up at him with cautious eyes, her lashes wet and clumped together from the rain. Her lips were slightly parted, as if she wanted to say something but didn't trust her voice. Lucas spoke gently, "Are you alone?" She gave a small nod, barely perceptible, but he saw it. "Are you waiting for someone?" he asked, keeping his tone soft, almost a whisper. Her voice, when it finally came, was so faint he had to lean in to hear it. "No." Lucas didn't ask anything else right away. He let the silence hang between them, not out of awkwardness, but out of respect. She looked too fragile for too many questions. Instead, he held out his hand. He didn't rush her. He just waited. Her eyes flicked to his palm, then to his face, searching for something, maybe a reason to trust him. After a long pause, her small, cold fingers reached out and settled in his. Her hand was trembling, her grip uncertain, but she didn't pull away. Lucas stood slowly, helping her to her feet. Her stuffed animal dangled from her other hand, its fur matted and dripping. Without a word, he guided her through the gleaming lobby. People turned to look, some curious, others concerned, but no one said anything. Lucas didn't care. He didn't stop walking until they reached the hotel's restaurant. It was quiet at this hour, with only a few guests lingering over late dinners. The maitre d' looked up in surprise when he saw Lucas, but Lucas gave a slight nod that said everything. Within minutes, a small table was cleared near the window, warm soup was brought out, and a thick blanket was gently draped over the girl's shoulders. She still hadn't spoken again, but she climbed onto the chair and picked up the spoon with both hands, as if unsure how to begin. She ate slowly at first, then faster, hunger overtaking caution. Lucas sat across from her, not eating, just watching. Not in judgment, but in quiet observation. She didn't cry. There were no tears now, only the occasional furtive glance in his direction, as if trying to understand why this man, so clean, so calm, so far removed from her world, was sitting across from her while she ate something warm for the first time in who knew how long. And Lucas, watching her in silence, felt something tighten in his chest that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with a 6-year-old girl who hadn't said her name. When the girl had finished eating, she didn't say anything. She simply placed her spoon down carefully, as though afraid she might be scolded for making noise, and kept her eyes on the tablecloth. Lucas didn't push. He let her sit in silence, wrapped in the soft blanket, her legs swinging slightly above the floor. A waiter came by to clear the table, and Lucas waved him off with a glance. There was no urgency here. Not anymore. He leaned forward a little, resting his elbows on the edge of the table, his voice as calm as it had been before. "Can I ask your name?" he said. She looked up at him again, slower this time, as if deciding she might trust him just a little. "Haley," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, hoarse from the cold and from not having spoken much. He nodded. "Hi, Haley. I'm Lucas." She didn't respond to that, but she didn't look away either. He took that as progress. After another pause, he asked, "Do you know where your mom is?" This time, her face shifted. Something in her expression darkened, not fear, exactly, but something close to it. A memory she didn't want to touch. Still, she answered. "She didn't come back," she said. Her fingers tightened around the stuffed animal again. She was working. Cleaning rooms. At a different hotel. Then she didn't come home. The words came out in pieces, as though she were still assembling them in her head. Lucas's expression remained steady, though inside, something clenched. He nodded again, encouraging her to keep going. "Where were you staying?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. "In a basement," she said. "A lady let us stay there, for a while. But Mama couldn't pay. So the lady told us to leave." Lucas didn't interrupt. He waited, letting her take her time. "Mama told me to stay with the neighbor. She said she'd come back. But she didn't." The last sentence was barely a whisper. Haley's eyes were dry, but there was something in them, something too old for her face, something that shouldn't exist in a child's gaze. She wasn't crying because she'd already cried herself out. Because children like her learn too soon that crying doesn't always fix anything. Lucas reached for a small linen napkin and quietly handed it across the table, not because she needed it for tears, but because it was something human. Something normal. She took it wordlessly, held it for a second, then tucked it into her lap. Lucas leaned back slightly, absorbing everything she told him. The pieces formed a picture he didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. A mother gone. A child left alone. No home. No help. And now, sitting across from him, this brave little girl who hadn't begged, hadn't panicked, hadn't asked for anything except a corner to disappear into. He had dealt with crises before, investors walking out, deals collapsing, millions on the line, but none of that compared to the quiet weight sitting in front of him now. For the first time in years, Lucas West felt completely unprepared. And it shook him. That same night, after making sure Haley was warm and resting in one of the quieter guest suites on the top floor, Lucas stepped into his office on the 20th floor and closed the door behind him. The lights of the city stretched out beyond the tall windows, but for once, he wasn't looking at them. His phone was already in his hand. With a few quick taps, he called his head of security and gave precise instructions to begin looking for a woman named Emily Harris, last known to be working as a cleaner at a local hotel, possibly without official paperwork or permanent residence. He didn't care about red tape. He cared about time. Within the hour, a private investigator was on the case. Lucas knew people, and when he decided something had to be done, it was done fast. Names were run through internal hotel systems, employment records were checked quietly, and calls were placed to hospitals, shelters, and every hotel manager in the city who owed him a favor, or who simply knew better than to ask questions. Meanwhile, Lucas returned to Haley's suite. She was already asleep, curled up in a bed far too big for her, the stuffed animal clutched tightly to her chest. The blanket had slipped off her shoulder, and he adjusted it gently, then stood watching her for a long moment. Her breathing was steady now. Peaceful. The next morning, Lucas arranged everything. He didn't delegate this. He personally called the best nanny agency he knew, requesting someone experienced, patient, and kind. He bought new clothes in her size, had toys brought in, books, even a purple nightlight after the nanny gently mentioned that some kids couldn't sleep well in total darkness. Lucas made space for her not just physically, but with a kind of careful attention he didn't even realize he had in him. He cleared his morning meetings. He reviewed proposals with one hand while watching her eat breakfast with the other. She still didn't smile. She barely spoke. But she let the nanny brush her hair, and she asked for water once. Tiny things. But he noticed every one of them. On the third day, just as the sky was beginning to turn gray with the approach of another storm, Lucas got a call from the investigator. A woman matching Emily's description had been found unconscious in a city hospital 3 days ago. No ID. Severely dehydrated and malnourished. She had collapsed in the street, near a bus stop, and was taken to the emergency room by a passerby. Because she had no identification, no one had known who she was. She had remained unconscious until the night before, and even then, her condition had been fragile. Lucas didn't hesitate. He gave the hospital his name, authorized every cost without blinking, and demanded a full update on her condition. Then he walked down the hallway to Haley's room and stood outside the door for a moment before going in. She was sitting on the floor with a coloring book, quietly humming to herself, her knees drawn up as she focused on a page filled with blue scribbles. She looked up when he entered, eyes wide and alert. "Your mom," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "They found her. She's in the hospital. She fainted, but she's alive. She's going to be okay." Haley didn't speak right away. She blinked at him, her lips slightly parted, the crayon still in her hand. Slowly, as if not sure she'd heard him right, she said, "She's really alive?" He nodded. "Yes. She's going to get better." And then, for the first time since he'd met her, her mouth quivered, her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "Can I see her?" Lucas felt his throat tighten as he said, "Soon. Very soon. I promise." Lucas arrived at the hospital later that afternoon, holding Haley's small hand as they entered through the emergency wing. The staff had been alerted ahead of time, and despite the usual chaos of patients and movement, everything seemed to clear before them as they were led through a quiet corridor to a recovery room on the 4th floor. Haley walked beside him without speaking, her fingers wrapped tightly around his, her face pale but composed. She had insisted on wearing her new purple coat, and she carried her stuffed animal in her other arm, clinging to it like a lifeline. The nurse outside the room gave Lucas a quiet nod. "She's awake," the woman said softly, but still weak. "We haven't told her much. We thought it would be better if she saw her daughter herself." Lucas thanked her and gently reached for the door. He turned to Haley, crouched down, and looked her in the eyes. "She's inside. Take your time, okay?" The little girl nodded, and for a moment, her composure cracked just slightly. Then she pushed open the door and stepped into the room without hesitation. Emily Harris was sitting up in bed, thin and pale, her arms resting weakly on the blanket. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes sunken with exhaustion, but they lit up the moment she saw the tiny figure entering the room. "Haley," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The girl froze for a heartbeat, and then rushed forward with a sudden cry, throwing her arms around her mother, the stuffed toy squished between them. Emily held her daughter as tightly as her strength would allow, her hands shaking, her breaths uneven. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she repeated her daughter's name over and over like a prayer, like an anchor pulling her back to life. Lucas stayed in the doorway, watching silently. He didn't move, didn't speak. This wasn't his moment. It was theirs. He saw Emily clutching her child like she might vanish again if she let go. He saw Haley's small fingers gripping the hospital gown, her face buried in her mother's chest. No explanations were needed. This was what mattered. This was the answer to every question the last few days had thrown at him. After a long while, Emily looked up, still cradling Haley, and her eyes met Lucas's. She froze for a second, confused, and then something shifted in her face, recognition, disbelief. "You," she said hoarsely. "You're the man from the hotel. The owner." Her voice cracked, but there was no fear in it. Only amazement. Lucas stepped further into the room and gave a slight smile, nodding. "Yes. I found Haley at the entrance. She was cold, alone. I couldn't walk away." Emily looked at her daughter, then back at him, tears still on her cheeks. "You took care of her?" she asked, almost as if she couldn't believe it. "You brought her here?" Lucas didn't speak immediately. He just looked at the woman, exhausted, broken, but alive, and said quietly, "She was brave. She waited for you. She never stopped hoping." Emily wiped her eyes with one trembling hand. "I thought I'd never see her again," she whispered. "I thought I failed her." Her voice broke on the last word, and Haley looked up at her with wide, serious eyes. "You didn't," Lucas said gently. "You did everything you could. And now she's safe. You both are." Silence settled in the room for a few moments, thick but calm. The storm was outside now, not here. And in that small hospital room, under two bright lights and the steady beeping of machines, something unspoken passed between them, gratitude, relief, and something else. A beginning. Something raw and unformed, but real. The days after the hospital reunion passed quietly, almost cautiously, as if none of them dared to move too quickly and disturb the fragile peace they had found. Emily was transferred to a private recovery suite, where she could rest without the noise and pressure of the general ward. Lucas handled everything, her treatment, her food, even arranging for a proper doctor to visit her daily. He visited often, sometimes alone, sometimes with Haley, and each time he brought something small, a book, a soft sweater, once even a tiny plant for the windowsill that Haley had picked out herself. Emily always looked surprised, always seemed unsure how to thank him, but Lucas never asked for gratitude. He wasn't there for that. One afternoon, while Haley was napping in a chair by the window, Lucas sat beside Emily in silence. She looked better now, still tired, still thinner than she should be, but the color had returned to her face, and her eyes no longer held the wild, panicked look of someone trying to survive. She turned to him after a while and asked, "Why did you help us?" "Really?" Her voice was quiet, not suspicious, just curious. "You didn't know us. You didn't have to." Lucas leaned back in the chair, exhaling slowly. His gaze drifted to the child sleeping beside them, then back to the woman who had once been a stranger. "When I was a kid," he said after a pause, "I had a younger brother. His name was Ethan. He was 5 years younger than me, curious, always climbing things he wasn't supposed to, always laughing too loudly. His voice was calm, but there was a tightness in it now, something deeper beneath the words. One afternoon, he slipped on the stairs in our backyard. I was supposed to be watching him. I wasn't. I thought he'd be fine. But he wasn't. Emily didn't interrupt. She just listened. He died before the ambulance arrived, Lucas continued, his voice low. After that, everything changed. My parents were present, but not really. Grief took over the house. I grew up fast. I built walls. I succeeded at everything because I couldn't afford to fail at anything ever again. But that guilt, he hesitated, then gave a hollow laugh. That never really left. Emily's expression softened with something that wasn't pity, but understanding. A kind of recognition. When I saw Haley that night outside the hotel, Lucas went on, I didn't know her story. I didn't know who she was. But I saw that look, the one Ethan had when he'd get hurt and try not to cry. I saw the way she clung to that toy like it was the only thing in the world that made sense. And I couldn't leave her. I couldn't lose another child. Emily reached out slowly and placed her hand over his. Her touch was light, but steady. You didn't lose her, she said. You saved her. Lucas didn't reply for a moment. He looked down at their hands and then gave the faintest nod. Then, hesitantly, Emily spoke again. I was married once. He wasn't like you. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled it back. At first, he was charming. That's how it always starts, right? He made me feel like I mattered. Then he made me feel like I owed him. Then like I was nothing without him. Her voice cracked. I left when I found out I was pregnant. I hid. Changed cities. Cleaned rooms, waited tables, did anything I could. I never let Haley near him. Never let him know she existed. Lucas didn't look away. He didn't ask for details she didn't want to give. He just sat there, listening in the way no one else ever had. You protected her, he said simply. I tried, Emily whispered. But I failed too. When I fainted. I thought that was it. I thought she'd be alone forever. She wasn't, Lucas said. You gave her everything you could. And when you couldn't anymore, someone else stepped in. That doesn't mean you failed. It means you survived. There was a long silence after that, but it wasn't heavy. It was full of things that didn't need to be said. Trust, fragile but real, settled between them. Lucas looked at her and saw not just the woman from the hospital bed, not just the mother fighting to hold her daughter's world together, but someone strong, someone who had crawled through hell and kept walking. And Emily, in turn, looked at Lucas not as the wealthy man from the posters, but as someone haunted, someone healing, someone who had chosen, against everything his world might have taught him, to care. When Haley stirred and reached sleepily for both of them, neither of them moved away. A year later, the air in their lives felt different. Softer. Steadier. There were no more hospital visits, no rushed phone calls in the middle of the night, no cold lobbies with watchful eyes. Life had settled into something that resembled peace, not perfect, not without its challenges, but real. Lucas had kept his promise to both Emily and Haley, though in truth, he had given them far more than either of them had asked for. The modest apartment he gifted them wasn't just a safe place to live, it was a home, carefully chosen on a quiet street near a school, with a small garden in the back where Haley had planted 2 sunflowers and a row of crooked tulips. Emily had cried when she first stepped inside. Not because of the furniture or the size or the view from the balcony, but because it had a front door that locked and no shadows on the walls. It was theirs. And no one could take it away. Haley adapted quickly. Children often do, but there was something in her that had always held on to hope, even when everything else was slipping away. She walked to school every morning with a backpack that had tiny purple stars on it and told anyone who asked that purple was her lucky color. She made friends easily, not loudly, but warmly, and teachers often remarked how kind she was, how steady, how she always noticed when someone needed help. At home, she filled the walls with drawings, houses with wide windows, rooms with soft yellow lights, people holding hands under blue skies. More than once, Emily found her daughter sketching at the kitchen table with complete focus, tongue between her teeth, mumbling about buildings and bridges and how Mr. Lucas says architects don't just make things pretty, they make them strong. Lucas had become a regular part of their lives, though he never pushed. At first, he came by on Sundays, bringing groceries or a small gift for Haley, a book about skyscrapers, a puzzle shaped like a museum. Sometimes he stayed for lunch, sometimes just for tea. Emily, still cautious with her heart, kept a respectful distance, but something about his presence made it easier to breathe. She didn't feel watched when he was there. She didn't feel judged. He spoke to her like she mattered, like her opinions were worth listening to, and slowly, she began to believe him. Over time, Sunday visits turned into weekend outings, walks in the park, rainy afternoons spent at art galleries or the quiet wing of the Natural History Museum where Haley could press buttons on the models of buildings and light up their hidden structures. Lucas didn't talk about work much around them. He still ran his hotel empire, still sat in boardrooms and closed deals that made headlines. But when he was with them, he seemed different. Softer, less distracted. He no longer checked his phone every 5 minutes. He started laughing more. And once, when Haley tugged on his sleeve and called him ours, he didn't correct her. He just smiled, with something in his eyes that hadn't been there in years. For Emily, trust came like the slow tide, returning, retreating, then inching closer again. She had built a life out of silence and strength, but around Lucas, she found herself speaking more freely. She told him about her dreams before everything went wrong, how she had once wanted to be a teacher, how she used to love poetry. She confessed how scared she had been, every night alone with Haley, listening for footsteps that might find them. Lucas never interrupted, never tried to fix her pain with empty promises. He just listened. And in that quiet, she found room to heal. One Sunday afternoon, after lunch, Haley disappeared into her room and returned with a drawing folded carefully into quarters. She handed it to Lucas without a word. He opened it slowly. It showed a small house with 3 stick figures holding hands in front of it. One had long hair, one had a stuffed animal, and the third had blonde scribbles on its head and a blue tie. Above them was written in crooked, bright letters, "Our Home." Lucas stared at it for a long moment. He didn't speak. He just looked at Haley, then at Emily, then back at the drawing. And in that moment, without ceremony or declaration, he realized something had shifted inside him. He had spent his life building towers, counting profits, surrounding himself with precision and control. But this child, this woman, this life they were building quietly, steadily, together, this was what he had never dared to imagine. He hadn't just helped them find a home. They had given him one too. And as Haley curled into his side, content and smiling, and Emily met his gaze with a soft, steady look that held no fear anymore, Lucas finally understood what it meant to belong. This story is not just about rescue, it's about mutual healing. The ending feels especially meaningful to me because it doesn't offer a fairy tale finale where everything is instantly perfect. Instead, it shows how love and trust grow not from grand gestures, but from simple, quiet choices, to stay, to listen, to not walk away. Lucas, who's spent his life in a world where worth is measured by numbers and influence, discovers true meaning in something that can't be bought: closeness, responsibility, vulnerability. And Emily, exhausted from hiding her pain, finally allows herself to live instead of just survive. Haley becomes the invisible thread that binds them into a real family. The ending doesn't place a period, it opens a door. That's where its strength lies. The